Hey, everybody. Welcome to the live stream where we are trying to make Monday nights great. Got an exciting evening for you, hopefully, as always. And let's get right into some things. Remember that the chat is where it's at. So chat with each other, chat with us, let the chat roll. Let us know what's going on. Always add a Q at the beginning of your chat to signify that it's a question. Helps us identify it easier so we can star it and come back to it if it doesn't get answered right away. And don't forget that we always want to celebrate those milestones. So put an M before your comment in the chat and tell us what you want to celebrate, whether that's a YouTube success like number of subscribers, number of views, you just got monetized, or if it's a personal success, like someone graduated, you had a baby, you bailed your doctor out of jail, whatever the success, you can celebrate with us. Let's introduce our guest. Our guest is a woodworking YouTuber for over a year. He has a strong social media presence with over 8,000 followers on Instagram. And that's not easy to accomplish. Has a background in photography and in fine arts, which is going to lead him to talk about some things tonight. Please welcome Suman Sarker to the live stream.
Hi, RT. How are you?
I'm good. You doing
Can I just say, you have the best hype music of a live stream start ever.
Hey, you gotta find that royalty-free stuff where you can and put it out there.
I love it.
It was the first time that we have put some channel trailers right before the live stream, and the highlight is the one right before the live stream tonight, Shepard's Workbench. And those that got to see it, I hope you enjoy it. I'm gonna play it again at the end, so whenever we sign off, hang around and watch it and leave a comment for Shepard, for Joe Shepard, and let him know how you like it, and go over there and subscribe to his channel. Check out some of that good content that he's got over there. Before his was Mighty Sawdust, but Mighty Sawdust will be highlighted again next week. So, but go ahead and check out Mighty Sawdust, kind of a newer channel and growing quickly. So check them out and get subscribed. So, Suman, how you doing?
I'm doing great, man. It's Monday. We're making Monday great, like you said. Talking about equipment, all the things.
Yeah, and you volunteered to do a giveaway tonight. You want to give us any details on that?
Yeah, so it's a tripod, like a miniature tripod that is fantastic for tabletop filming with a smaller camera. Just it'll be able to get you into tight spaces and be able to give you a perspective that's a little bit harder to get with a traditional tripod that sits on the ground. So hopefully it's something that is of use to one of the viewers here today.
Yeah, I've been in situations before on my projects when a shorter tripod would have helped out. My tripod only goes down to so far.
Exactly.
And you're trying to do something on a bench top or something, it can be difficult. So that's a great giveaway. And hang around because we're going to do that drawing live. And the keyword tonight is going to be #Suman. So you want to make sure that whenever it's time that you type that into the chat, #Suman. Suman being our guest and volunteering to do this. We've been giving away something every week on this live stream. I'm not saying that we're going to guarantee that we're going to give away something on every live stream, but we have had a great run for over a month now.
I think it's a great concept, and that's part of the reason why I wanted to keep it going. And I think for future guests, I highly recommend we keep that going. It just seems more cheerful.
Yeah, everybody likes it. Speaking of giveaways, our guest next week has built a reputation about doing giveaways. Have you seen the shows by Mastering Mayhem?
I haven't had the opportunity yet, but I did see the the posting for next week's live stream. So I'll be sure to check it out after today.
Yeah, great guy. He does giveaways every Saturday on his
That's
channel,
awesome.
and he does some product reviews, some tool reviews, and tech reviews, which are pretty cool. He reviews, I think, just everything that he ends up giving away. So he gets a tool, does a
Oh, very
review,
cool.
and then he fills up the shelves behind him on his live stream. And if he draws your name, you get to pick which prize you want, which is kind of a cool
That's a great concept. I love it.
Yeah, it'd be nice if we got to that point. Not that I
Someday.
want to compete with him, but let's take it one day at a time. Seeing a lot of comments coming in. Suman, where do you want to start? You want to start about cameras, or where do you want to start this conversation?
Sure. Yeah. So I guess I wanted to preface today's conversation about equipment, lighting, cameras, and all of that stuff by saying that content is king. So there's nothing that's going to, no amount of equipment is going to make your videos better than the amount of thought that you put into the video itself, and the quality of the content and the information you present and the value that you present to your viewers is going to always supersede the quality of the video. So really keep that in mind. And so today is a little bit of a more nuanced conversation about some of the other ways you can improve your YouTube production value as well as the quality of your videos, but content is always going to come first.
So when it comes to making content, Suman, you have to have a way to record the video, and you don't have to go out and spend a car payment or more on a camera to be on YouTube or Instagram or any of those. What are some of the most economical options to get us started?
Right. So the best camera that you probably already have is your phone. This thing, especially in the last couple of years, these have gotten increasingly better and better and better. The one thing that I will say is camera phones, at least the video features on camera phones, are typically not the best in terms of what you're able to control on using that camera. So it might be best to invest in some aftermarket softwares that let you take control over some of the manual features that you would get on higher end cameras. So some of the apps like Filmic Pro, I know it's a very, very popular one. I believe it's about $15 or so. That's a really, really great software that lets you control all of the technical elements of a camera off of your phone. And it kind of really rejuvenates and supercharges your phone to be a more equipped camera phone. The other software that I would mention quickly is the Pro Camera by Moment. And there's another one called ProTake that people seem to like, but it has a subscription model. And I don't know about you, I have enough subscription models in my life and things that I'm subscribed to. So I try to stay away from subscription models, especially when it comes to software.
Yeah. So just for us that are not technically savvy, you mentioned Filmic Pro. That's Filmic Pro.
Yep. It is an app that you can download. Correct. It is an app that you can download from the App Store, and I believe there's an Android version as well. And it will let you control things like aperture, shutter speed, and ISO. We'll get into the conversations about those things in a little bit, but just know that it gives you the level of control of your camera that you never thought was possible with it based on the native software that comes with your camera.
Okay. Great. So as far as if you go beyond the smartphone,
yes,
what's the next level up that's acceptable for getting you better pictures than you could get with your cell phone? I don't want to say cell phone, I sound old. Your smartphone, and yet won't break the bank.
Right. So one of the best things, I would say, the thing that you can Google to find some really well-rated and well-reviewed cameras would be the Vlogger camera. If you Google that, that'll probably land you on a long list of cameras that are in the affordable consumer range. So it'll be anywhere from perhaps $300 to $600-700 range. And those are fantastic cameras because they kind of feature a lot of the important components of being in the new social media space where you might be making content for Instagram or YouTube or any other platform. And one of the most important things that these cameras provide is they're compact, but they also have a flip screen, which is really important. If you notice, if you're a one-man show and you're doing all of the filming and you're also, the person in front of the camera, a flip screen and being able to see yourself and being able to see yourself in the composition that you're in is incredibly valuable. And so these quote unquote vlogging cameras tend to almost always have a flip screen. So just to kind of give you an idea of some of the equipments out there in that range that I think are really, really great, I will always be a fan of the Canon M50 version 2. I grew up using the Canon style system, so the layout and all of the buttons and all of that makes sense to me. So I'm biased towards the Canon. But you have the Sony ZV-1. So that's Sony Z as in ZV-1, Fujifilm X-S10, SAM10, the Panasonic G5 II, and of course the Canon 50D Mark II.
All right. Now, what if you want to get serious with this thing? So what if you want to take it to that upper echelon level beyond what you're talking about with a vlog camera there?
So I will say, I can't really foresee too many reasons why someone in the woodworking space and not in the film industry, or someone who really puts their videography as the forefront of everything else, all of the cameras that we just talked about, those are probably more than adequate for most of us in the shop. If you do want to take it further, then you're looking towards perhaps the mirrorless high-end cameras like a Canon EOS R5 or a R6. Any of the Sony A7 series are pretty good too. They're actually really good. And so those are your newer age mirrorless cameras that pack in a serious punch when it comes to video quality, which of course is a much newer thing. This wasn't really available even 5 years ago. They weren't really that great cameras, but nowadays they can outpace some of the serious, filming, cinematography cameras out there.
Yeah. And just to let everybody know that, because I saw a few joining us in progress, we are doing a giveaway a little bit later, and we will give you that word to use in the chat again. Right now we're talking cameras, so I appreciate you coming on board. We do have a couple of questions at this point,
Yes.
Suman, if we can look at that.
Absolutely.
4321 says, what if all that manual photography stuff confuses you?
Yeah.
This is why I just use the phone with native filming app.
Right. So I think one of the most important things about taking manual control is you get the best out of the camera that you have. And like I mentioned, we will talk about some of the core principles of exposure. So your shutter speed, ISO, and my goodness, your shutter speed, ISO, and your frame rates that you're using. So we'll talk about some of the exposure settings, but really, even if you're not comfortable with it, it really wouldn't take a lot of time to get comfortable with it pretty quickly, because at the end of the day, those three things sort of affect each other, and it adjusts the brightness in what you can see on the screen. But I really kind of implore you, because for a cell phone, for example, the upfront investment isn't crazy, right? So if you're putting $15 for the app, you can play with it, and the camera will give you an immediate feedback on the screen on what you're doing and what that means. So I would say, even if you're uncomfortable with it, there's an opportunity to try it out on your phone. And if you're comfortable with some of the manual tinkering of the settings, then you can obviously feel free to use that feature on your phone, or get a more dedicated camera that allows you to control that as a native option.
Yes. We'll get back to more questions, but whenever you get a new toy, new camera, or a new app to go with your phone,
Best time ever.
It's a great feeling, right, to have these new toys. What level of playtime do you recommend? I mean, where you just say, go shoot some photos out in the yard, go take some pictures of leaves, go do some video with you walking, go do some video with you moving in front of the camera with the camera being still, before you say, okay, you should be ready now to move forward with actual production using the camera. Because once you cut a board, you can't uncut it and redo it for the camera?
Right. No, that's a great question. I would say one of the best ways of looking at this is you're in control of the process, right? So, we're YouTubers because we kind of like being in charge of the process of the things that we create. And even if you kind of go head first and put that equipment that you just got that day, jump it into the shop and you start filming, it's okay to make mistakes. Just know that it's going to be a little bit of a learning process. So I would recommend you play with it for at least a week or so. So I used to do wedding photography on a very small capacity, and I remember I got a new camera and I just took it out to a wedding, which is a terrible idea. You should never really do that. But talk about, taking a risk and really putting yourself in a situation where you kind of have to sink or swim with that equipment. I don't recommend doing that. And I think because you're in control of the process in your shop when you're filming, it's okay to make mistakes. It's okay to go out there and shoot right away, but give it a week or so, play around with it, play with the camera indoors because the lighting condition indoors is very different from outdoors, and then play around with it in your shop where it's probably a different lighting condition as well.
All right. So got another question for you from our buddy Scott.
Mhm.
I have an expensive camera, but worry about sawdust ruining it. Is this something to be concerned about?
Yeah, it's something to be very concerned about. So typically speaking, the vlogging style cameras that you're going to find, they don't have something called weather sealing. So usually there's some level of that O-ring, the plastic ring that's used for water sealing or air sealing type components. They use a similar mechanism in cameras that goes for all of the major buttons, any of the moving parts in it. And when you buy the more professional cameras, they will come with a certain level of weather sealing rating. And so those cameras, you can take them anywhere. You can take them into the tundras, you can take them to the desert, you can take them into a hurricane zone, and they'll work just fine because they're designed to. So the super expensive cameras are sealed. You don't really have to worry about it. For Canon, for example, anything that has a red ring around the lens, that lens is going to be sealed to a particular standard, but there's some minute variations there. For your typical vlogging camera that you're going to buy, yeah, you're going to have to keep it in mind that that camera is going to get exposed to some things, and it will get inside the camera one way or another. And it's something that you're going to have to be willing to sacrifice a little bit.
All right, that's great. Should I be shooting in 4K? Coming from Jake.
The short answer is no. So I will say no with the caveat that I shoot in 4K, and I partially hate myself for it because when you're shooting in 4K, the file sizes are absolutely astronomical. And for those who may not be familiar, 4K is effectively 4 times the resolution of a 1080p high definition video. And so YouTube, by and large, even though it has the capacity to handle 4K and it will do 4K output, generally speaking, most people, depending on the internet speed and everything, they're watching things at 1080p. And there is really no need to shoot 4K because it almost quadruples, if not 5 times, is your file size, and you need a pretty beefy computer to be able to edit that. Not only that, with some of the cameras out there, if you're shooting 4K and you're shooting continuously, especially in maybe a summer day, those cameras will overheat and they will tell you to stop, let it cool, and then you can come back and shoot again. So there are certainly some downsides to shooting 4K, but I would say file size and computer processing power is the largest downside. But if you're like me, who wants to get the best out of the camera, the crispest looking image, and you have the computer to handle that, yes, but just know that most viewers don't care. They won't notice a difference between 4K and 1080p. And a lot of the popular and successful YouTube channels out there, they shoot in 1080p because they have a production line that just cannot, take in that much footage that they usually shoot in 4K and be able to house it. You need like an Amazon-size warehouse to be able to house that much data.
Yeah.
So yes and no.
That was the answer that Jake was looking for.
Yeah. Don't shoot 4K, please. If you can avoid it, I would avoid it. it takes so much energy out of your computer to be able to process that much data. Just to kind of give you a ballpark perspective, and perhaps some of you guys can compare. So out of my R6, I think every video that I put out there, I usually shoot maybe about 60 minutes worth of total footage. And I'm very selective with how I shoot because it's in 4K and I know I'm burning memory. And the concept of burning memory kind of stays with you a lot more in 4K setting than 1080p. And so for a single video, I can easily go into 160 to 200 gigs of file. That's how much data needs to be processed. So if you feel like that's something you can store reliably and happily, then yes, 4K is fantastic because it looks beautiful.
Well, if I was watching it on a IMAX theater, I might
right, exactly.
insist on it. But most people watch YouTube
on their phones.
On their phones.
Mm-hmm.
Right. A few will watch it on their TV, that or you get into a tablet or computer. I think like 20% watch on computer now.
Mm-hmm.
I'm finally part of the 20%.
RT, you just got these numbers on the back of your mind. That's amazing. I love it.
Okay, well, if I didn't get them right, it's because I made them up. No, but I think that's about right. So Alien Leader won the drawing last week. And he said he'll be here on 13th. Thanks, Jake and Maryman. Okay, you're welcome. Okay, so it looks like the giveaway is going to be there on the 13th. That's fantastic. Andy, new here to the live show. Thank you, Andy. I appreciate you being here. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you get something out of it because cameras and lighting can be of interest to those beyond just those making videos for social media and YouTube. And we all can do it. And we have non-woodworking people in here all the time. And here's one, Dash with Ash in Canada. Ashley has a channel now that she does DoorDash, like a Uber Eats type thing. And she videos it as she goes. And
oh, that's awesome.
So she does a vlog, and it's growing pretty quickly for a channel that I think has 5 or 6 videos on it. And she had another channel that she still has that did YouTube stuff. So I've known
Welcome
Ashley
to
for a
the
little while
chat, Dash.
now.
I have to say, for some reason I thought Ash and Canada, perhaps we're talking about Ash Lumber. So I initially thought of it as a woodworking channel in a pun way.
We love our puns. Everyman Build says recently got a Sony A6400. Spent a bunch of time watching tutorials, figure it out. Probably one of my most favorite features is the zebra setting.
Yes. Yeah, so the zebra setting is, it basically shows you the areas of an image within the frame that is overexposed. And normally, for example, if you're looking at my background, which has some white in it, and RT's background as well, you kind of see the white, but there's a difference between white that has some pixel value to it, so it's got some gradation of color and combinations of color, versus white to the point where the camera does not recognize anything. It just sees it as pure white beyond blown out imaging. So it'll kind of tell you that, hey, this white I cannot see as anything at all. It's not just white as a color, it's white as in it's too bright for me to even capture. And so zebras will give you that information, and so you can easily tell if you have anything in your frame that's overexposed, and it's a great feature to have. And a lot of cameras, I believe some of the apps for the software that we talked about for the phones, they also give you zebra settings. It's not something that you're going to use tremendously in a wood shop. Generally speaking, you're going to be in a fairly controlled environment, and there's not going to be a whole lot of ranges of light value. But I can see a scenario where if you're turning on a lathe and the light is spot and focused in that one area, that might be very bright relative to the surrounding area. So if you try to expose for somewhere in the middle of the bowl that you might be carving might be overexposed, and the zebras will tell you that.
That's a nice feature. All right, AJ Says, anybody on the fence about manual photography, it's 100% worth it. So he says, feel free to DM him about it. So it's definitely got its benefits, right? I mean, you are in control, and you get off of that automatic feature.
Exactly. And you know, if you take a camera and you're filming and you go from inside your house to outside where it might be a nice sunny day, the camera will automatically adjust for the indoor lighting condition. And as soon as you step out, there's this transition period of light adjustment, right? To kind of get reacclimated. Our eyes do that too, in some respect. You know, our pupils dilate and allows us to readjust to the lighting conditions that we're in. And that's not something that's desirable in a video. It's wonderful because the camera can see what you're doing. Our eyes, it happens so quickly, and it happens in a way where we don't really pay attention to it. But when you're staring at it in an explicit video, that adjustment period is not ideal, and you want to try to avoid that if you can. And so when you have a manual control over the process, you can say, I know I'm going out there and the exposure value is going to be this much. So I will just kind of keep it to that and then go outside or that lighting environment. So highly recommend manual process for kind of taking control of how the image looks, and there are no surprises in a manual scenario. You're in control of all of the elements that go into it. But you know, RT, if you want to talk about some of the exposure elements, we can certainly get into that.
Well, you're the expert. You're talking above my head at this point, so feel free to talk about those.
So when it comes to photography and when it comes to videography, a lot of the principles of exposure, as in how much the camera is kind of what you see on the back of the screen and how much brightness, so to speak, there is in what you're filming, there's three variables that go into it. And that is shutter speed, which is effectively, you know, when you take a picture of a fast moving object, you need that image to be captured really, really quickly, because otherwise it's going to look blurry, right? So that's kind of shutter speed, and it's how much light is being let in, sampled in a 1 second period. You've got aperture, which is the opening of the lens. So on the back of a lens, I could probably show you. So this is a lens, for example. On the back end, there's a little blade that kind of controls how much light can go in and out of a lens. And the aperture is also another one of those variables about how much light goes in. And the last thing is a digital thing. So back in the olden days, I don't know if any of you guys have shot in film before, you'd get film that is like an ISO 400 film or 800 film or 100 film. There is a digital equivalent of that. So on the back of your camera, there is a digital sensor, kind of like the film, and it can automatically adjust the amount of sensitivity that it produces to light. And so those numbers translate from film world into ISOs. That's what we call them. And so a combination of shutter speed, aperture, and ISO is going to give you an image. If you adjust one, let's say you go from a shutter speed of 1/50th of a second to 1/100th of a second, you have just cut the light in a factor of half. And so now you need to adjust one of the other two things to kind of bring it back to the level of brightness that you had in the frame. So it may seem a little daunting at first to kind of get used to the concept of aperture, ISO, and shutter speed. But again, if you have one of those apps and you kind of play with it, it'll make a lot more sense. You don't have to buy an expensive camera to kind of tinker with that concept. And once it makes sense, you'll start to appreciate the level of control it gives you, because when you're doing a video, so for photography and a still image, shutter speed almost doesn't matter unless the object is moving, in which case you want a fast shutter speed. In video, you really want to stay within twice your frame rate. So most of us are filming at 24 frames per second or 30 frames per second. And so if you're shooting at 24 frames per second, your shutter speed should be 1/50th frame per second. If you're shooting at 30th frames per second, your shutter speed should be 1/60th. And so you basically want to double. And there's a whole host of reasons behind why that works. I won't go into it unless someone really wants to know. But just know that you want to double your frame per second reading. And so in that situation, you can say, okay, I'm shooting 24 frames per second in this environment. that means my shutter speed needs to be 1/50th. And now you have two other variables that you can adjust, and that's your ISO and aperture. And so that kind of will lead you into the level of exposure that you need for the environment that you're in. Again, it seems daunting, but I promise you, once you play with it, the amount of control that you get and the look of the image that you get will convince you that it is the better way to go.
Yeah. So as you talk about shutter speed, aperture, ISO, you're making all these adjustments to the camera, but the frames per second, 24
Yeah.
versus 30.
Yeah.
We hear that on a lot of videos
Yes.
out there on YouTube. I
Yeah.
shoot in 24, I shoot in 30. Is there a layman's term for the difference and why you would go with one over the other?
Right. So frames per second effectively means how many still images your camera is taking and packing it into 1 second. And a combination of all of those images being shown in that second interval is what gives us motion picture. That's why it's called motion picture, because of the moving frames. So traditionally, you want to shoot in 1/24th or 1/30th. I will lean you very heavily towards 1/24th frames per second. And the reason for it is pretty much every media that you consume, when you go to a movie theater, every single piece of movie that you have seen probably was shown at 24th frame per second. I think historically there's been 16 movies that's been showed in any other frame rates than 24th. And then back in the early days of filmmaking, no audio, those like moving pictures that you see where people are jittery and jumping, those are a little bit lower, but that's because of the limitation of the technology that they had. But by and large, 1/24th is the standard for motion picture. It's the standard for video production typically. Can you shoot in 1/30th? Absolutely, you can. And as long as the editing platform that you're using understands that you're putting in 1/30th frame per second content, and you're editing with only 1/30th frame per second content, then it's fine. The problem happens is when you have two different pieces of media. You've got a video that you shot at 1/24th frames per second, or 24 frames per second. And then you've got a media that you shot in 30 frames per second. And maybe you start editing at the 24 frame per second version, and then you import a 30. That becomes problematic because then the computer the timeline is the timeline. It's going to be set at 24th. And so the computer is going to then reinterpolate the 30 frame per second into 24 frame per second. And there has been some studies that show, like, if people watch it enough times, they kind of they get really tired and they get pretty grumpy because their brain is doing a little bit of a jump with some of the frames that get skipped, some of the frames that get skipped. So things don't look natural and it doesn't feel natural. So if you're shooting 30th, stick to 30th. If you're shooting 24, stick to 24. I recommend 24 just because it's something that we're so used to seeing everywhere.
All right. If you're getting any value out of this and learning anything or just having a good time with us, please hit that like button. I would appreciate it. And there was a comment in here I wanted to ask you about. Said from AJ, I routinely shoot in 1080p, but export the final to 4K.
Yeah.
It's not native 4K, but it keeps YouTube's compression from killing the quality. What do you know about that? About YouTube's compression?
Yeah. This is a great point. So whenever you have a video file and you're exporting it, so let's just say it's a 10 gigabyte file, there's no way YouTube is going to store 10 gigabytes of file given the millions and millions of videos that gets uploaded in a given day. So they also, believe it or not, spend billions and billions of dollars storing these files, but they're not going to store it at the raw file size. So they'll compress it usually. And they have really fancy algorithms to be able to compress files into a smaller format, yet still produce a fairly high level of visual quality and audio quality. With that being said, though, if YouTube recognizes that the file that you have is a 4K file, the compression algorithm kind of gives you a little bit more wiggle room in terms of the file size, and the quality of the video ultimately to the viewer will look a little bit better if you upscale your 1080p content into 4K, and then you publish that on YouTube. It's a very common tactic that's used fairly widely.
I was not aware, so I appreciate you making it common with me. Okay, few more questions about cameras, then we're going to do the drawing.
Sure.
What is a good trick for getting manual focus dialed in when you're in front of the camera?
Yeah. So back in the day, so I initially, believe it or not, before this YouTube channel that I started, I thought I wanted to make a YouTube video and maybe kind of get into making videos in the woodworking, YouTube space. And I think I shot my first video about 3 or 4 years ago. And it was with an old school DSLR that doesn't have, it has a video feature, but it doesn't have auto face detect and focus racking system. And so that means you had to stay in a spot because that's where it's in focus, unless you've got somebody behind the camera, doing the focusing for you. And it was exhausting. So that ended my YouTube career 3 years ago. And nowadays, cameras have auto face detect and follow focus with a face or a human figure. So all of the cameras that I talked about, some of the vlogging cameras, they all have certain level of that feature, and that'll keep you in focus when you're in the frame moving on and about. I highly recommend going that route because, yeah, if you're trying to do a manual focus where you're manually focusing the lens to be in an area that you want, it's very challenging when you're not behind the camera. And the only time you would do manual focus, at least in woodworking that I found, is, if you want to show this really specific spot, maybe you're chiseling away at a small little area and the camera is static and the piece that you're chiseling is static. So it makes sense to not let the camera figure out what it needs to focus on, just tell it where to focus on, right? So in those scenarios, a manual focus makes a lot of sense. But if you're in front of the camera and you've got eyes and you've got a, human figured shape, let the camera do the work for you.
All right. And John said, explain frame rate to me like I'm a 5-year-old. So you kind of went into frame rate before, but is there a simpler way to look at it?
Yeah. So frame rate is how many still images are shown in 1 second increment of you viewing it. And so the camera basically just takes a whole bunch of stacks of images and it'll kind of keep capturing it over time. So 24 frames per second literally means the camera is shooting 24 still images, pictures, that it is putting in a time structure. So every image gets 1/24th of a second, and it just shows it to you in that, linear temporal fashion. So 24 frames per second means it's taking 24 pictures for 1 second of value of video, and 30 frames per second means 30 images are being captured that's being shown in that 1 second period. And I think one of the other things that I forgot to mention is there are scenarios where you would shoot at a much higher frame rate than that. So you may shoot at 60 frames per second, and you're shooting, you're taking 60 pictures within 1 second, or you're shooting 120th. So a lot of the slow motion videos that we may have seen in the YouTube space, in movies, etc., those tend to utilize that 120 to 40 frames per second, and then they bring it down to 24 frames per second. That gives you the illusion of slow speed because the camera captured those images at a pretty high rate. And so that's how you get slow motion. So if you're trying to do some cool slow motion, that's the only time you would be shooting, 160 frames per second or 120 or 240. Otherwise, 30 and 24 is your best friend.
Awesome. So we're getting a lot of comments. John says he's getting higher views than the figures I quoted for tablets and TV, which is good. I just heard some figures for overall YouTube, but that might mean he's getting more of my demographic. Let's see. Hotmail 11747 says this is good stuff. I agree. This is
I love talking about cameras.
Yeah. How about a GoPro? Do you recommend a GoPro? And if so, which
Yeah.
one?
Yeah. So, believe it or not, the first camera that I bought, because bringing a camera into the wood shop means it's a sacrificial camera, so to speak, because you get dust and all these things involved, right? The good thing to know, I know it's a tangent, but like these phones are almost waterproof, right? They're also dust proof, and so it's very hard to get particulates inside of them, and so they're automatically really, really well sealed, and they come with a sealing like an IP65 rating that tells you that this is waterproof and you can submerge it, I think, for 30 minutes or so. So that's the tangent. But GoPro is actually sealed to similar standards, because a lot of folks, tend to take these cameras into very harsh environments. So, you could have a skateboarder, or you could have a snowboarder. They just take it into such difficult, harsh conditions. Sometimes people take it swimming with them. And so those cameras are, at least with the casing, they can handle any harsh conditions. And I think in that respect, a GoPro is fantastic to bring into the shop, because inherently it's designed to withstand some of the particulates that you'll see in the shop. The only downside to GoPro is that it has a really wide angle of view. So these are meant to be action cameras. And even though you can kind of bring it into a tighter frame, they do have the option to do that, like the Hero 6, as I recall, does let you bring it into a tighter, closer, more zoomed in frame. They're not going to give you the best image quality, but they're really, really good action cameras, and they have the sealing to be able to handle that situation. So I think the best place to use a GoPro would be like a B camera. If you're trying to show the passage of time, GoPro has a time-lapse feature, and you can just mount it in a ceiling or something like that to show the process in your shop that's happening, or up close, or it doesn't really matter. But GoPros can handle those scenarios very well. But as far as a main camera goes, the screen is too small. You can't really see a whole lot out of it. It doesn't have a flip screen. It can't take external audio. It just has a lot of downsides with respect to being a dedicated, primary camera. But it's a fantastic secondary camera.
Yes, sir. You know what would go good with a GoPro? A miniature tripod.
It actually would, yes. I love the segue.
And you could definitely get the shots you need for all of your B-roll, and it'll be great. So I am going to share the screen. It is time to put hashtag Suman in the chat so that you can have a chance to win the miniature tripod that Suman has so graciously offered as this week's prize. We do have the stipulation, and we put in the description that you need to live or have a mailing address within the 48 contiguous states in the United States, and you cannot have won last week on this channel, which only eliminates one winner. But I'm sorry, we need to spread this around. And so I've got this loaded up. I've got the broadcast selected, the match text. Can everyone see this, Suman? Hello?
I can see it. Yes.
Okay.
Sorry.
All right. No worries. And we are going to start collecting comments now. 17 entries. And we will select our winner and see who wins the mini tripod. Oh, I see a lot of icons that I recognize.
Yay! Congratulations.
All right. Centimetros. I can't say it. I apologize. Can you say that by chance?
I cannot. No, I don't want to attempt to butcher it.
Centimetros, and I apologize, but congratulations. That is awesome. And
Yeah, please feel free to message me on Instagram, or from YouTube. You should be able to contact me from there. Send me the details on where the package needs to go, and I will send it your way. I hope you like it. I have one, and I really like it. I think it's a nifty little thing. So I hope you enjoy it.
yeah, this is great. Congratulations. Okay, now we had some other comments. And we're going to transition to lighting here. Let me just make sure. 3D Jeff says hello all. Oh, RA Charlie guy says, Suman, this is great stuff. I agree.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I'm glad you're here.
I wish I understood it all, but I agree.
We can chat offline, RT.
Yeah.
We can get through it together.
Whenever I go to make my purchases, I know who to contact.
There you go. And guys, for those of you guys and gals that's on the chat, if you have any questions about any particular equipment or the technical elements of video production, please feel free to reach out. My email address is on the YouTube page. You can reach out to me on Instagram as well. The handle is the same thing. It's Woodcraft by Suman, and I'll be more than happy to talk to you about it. It's something that I enjoy talking about, so it's not a bother at all. Reach out anytime you feel like it.
We can tell that you enjoy talking about it. You have energy around this that I love. So Everyman Build says it may or may not be worth mentioning. It's always worth mentioning. Outside of the US and a few other countries where AC is 50 instead of 60, you may find that 25 frames per second, 25p better for some lighting to prevent flicker.
This is a fantastic segue into the lighting conversation if you want to head there, RT.
Yeah, let's talk about lighting, because we've got that, and we had I'm sorry, shared the wrong one first. Do you use any external lighting when filming?
Yeah, so I definitely use external lighting, but I will say that I have a more pragmatic approach to lighting in my shop, because I'm not trying to be the YouTuber who is like a videographer or a video production person. If I were to pursue that, I would have a completely different setup that is very, very dialed in, to the keen eyes of the folks who would want to see spectacular lighting and just everything being done more meticulously. But for the woodworking audience, I think generally speaking, you don't need crazy amounts of light. You don't need crazy setup, and so a pragmatic approach is the best way to go. And what do I mean by that? So the first thought that you may have is, well, I have a garage. I work out of a garage and make things, and I film in it. So why don't I go ahead and buy some garage lighting? Nowadays, they make fairly inexpensive LED lights for shops or for basements, and you've seen one of those. They're like $30, and they output like 50 bajillion lumens, and that they seem like a fantastic tool, and to some extent they are. They're fantastic for being a garage light, but they don't necessarily produce the quality of light that the camera wants to see. And so one of the things that you want to be mindful of, and I'm not saying don't use your typical garage lights, but be mindful of what type of light you're buying when it comes to garage lights. So one of the things that you want to be mindful of is something called color rendering index. And that is the quality of the light that is being output from the LED diodes. And how good is that quality, and how good is it on the spectrum of light? And so when it hits an object that you're trying to capture on your camera, that it reflects back in a state that is an accurate representation of what it is that you're shooting. So all of that is a fancy way of saying, does it look like how it's supposed to? Are the colors like the way they're supposed to be? And a good light will push light out that allows you to see things with nice, true, rich, vibrant color. And so color rendering index is an aggregate way to measure that. And almost every scenario, if you look hard enough, you should be able to find color rendering index, or CRI is what it's called, from the lights that you're looking to purchase. If it doesn't have a CRI rating, skip it, because there are a lot of options out there that they will tell you what the CRI index is. So in my shop, I have the Barina shop lights. They're like the 8-foot LED strip lights, and I've got, I think, 6 or 8 of those. And they output serious amounts of light, and they're fantastic because it floods the whole space. But they only shoot about 88, I believe, 85 or 88 CRIs. And so this number can go anywhere from, I suppose, in theory, 0 to 100. The closer you are to 100, the better the quality of the light. Your typical shop light tends to hang out in the 75 to 85 range. I think 85 to 90 is pretty good, but really 90 plus is where you want to be. And I have seen 0 shop lights that output anything above 90. So my shop, I use these 85, 88 range, and then I flood it with some other dedicated video lights. So I probably average out somewhere around 90, 92 or so, because the dedicated video lights is 99% CRI. So that is to say, I have a pragmatic approach. I need lights, and I don't want to spend $50,000 on lights. So I try to combine things to get a reasonably good quality light without breaking the bank. So I highly recommend the Barina lights. Some of you may already have them in your shop. They're fantastic. But if you're looking to, kind of up your game and add more dedicated video lights, we certainly can talk more about that. In my case, I use Godox SL150. So they're like kind of like a big lamp with a single unit of LED diode. That's just a massive diode, and it outputs about 150 watts of light, which is a fair bit. And I have a couple of those that I spread across in the shop, and I use different light modifiers to be able to hit that. For me, I really don't like having to move around my shop every time I'm framing a shot and readjusting my lights. So I tend to flood the space quite a bit. And then, and we can talk about ways you can flood light in your shop in a little bit. Let me know if you're interested in knowing that. But I have one light that stays on the ground that I take with me. So wherever I'm kind of shooting something and I want to add a little bit more extra pop of light there relative to the rest of the space that's flooded, I'll use that light. And that's on a softbox.
All right, that's a lot of awesome information. No, that's good.
So
Thank you.
we can talk about color rendering index. If you guys have any questions about that, let me know. We can certainly elaborate on it. But in terms of the actual lights, I would say right now, LED lights, good quality video LED lights, has never been cheaper and more accessible. I remember, in the I think 2008 to 10 range, a good LED panel would cost around anywhere from $2,000 to $10,000. A good one. That's how expensive they were. Nowadays, you can find 3 of them for $250 probably, and they can output about 50 watts a piece. So, if you're looking to get into video lights, the LED panels that are like 12 inches by 12 inches with maybe 600 plus little diodes in it, those are fantastic lights. The one thing to keep in mind is that the size of the light source matters, right? So if you've got a really big box, thank you for sharing that. So those lights are fantastic because they output really high CRI index light. I'm sure somewhere down there it probably says 97 CRI. And they also, in this case, also does color, which is fantastic. And it lets you adjust the whiteness of the light or the color temperature. So you have the super bright white 5500 Kelvin light all the way down to the candlelight yellow tone. And usually somewhere in the middle is a good spot to be in. So these lights are fantastic because it gives you so much option, good output, inexpensive. It comes with its own, tripods. You just can't beat those. Just know that they are a little bit harsher because they're not a big source of light. And so you may, if you want something that looks a little bit more softer, you can always kind of hit it against a wall, like a white wall or something like that, and have it be reflected back instead of having the light be directly, facing whatever it is that you're filming.
Yeah, one thing about these type of lights, if you do get scared away by that price tag, I have a set, but I didn't pay near that much. I waited till Amazon Prime Day, and they put these things on some really good sales. I mean, don't be surprised if you couldn't get this half off or even more off. Yeah, it's timing is everything when it comes to these.
Right, and sometimes it can be difficult to trust, some of these brands that GVM stands for Good Video Maker. Doesn't that sound like the most knockoff name out there for a brand? And so it may be difficult to invest your money on a brand that's titled that way. But really, GVM, ePhoto, and I believe there's one other brand that I'm forgetting right now. They all have been in this space for almost over a decade, and they produce really good quality light. I have a couple of GVM equipments, and I have zero complaints. Are they industry grade, solid, fantastic? You can throw them anywhere, take them on in a high budget film scenario? No. But in a wood shop where you're in a static controlled environment, they're fantastic.
And this is the set that I have, and so they're good for live streaming too.
Right, and these are RGB lights. And just one thing I wanted to point out is RGB lights will output. So even though it says it's 50-watt output, for the actual color component, it's much less than that. It outputs 50 watt when all of the diodes are running at full blast on the kind of a warmer tone white light. But this should provide plenty of light for you to be able to shoot in your shop. And perhaps you're not interested in the color spectrums, and you just want some level of white. White lights, GVM also makes them, and they're a lot more inexpensive than the RGB alternative. So certainly, if you're looking to save some bucks and you don't need the color, then go for the white lights.
Yep. Here's a celebration for us. Custom Creative Carving says my channel hit 500 members and 50,000 views.
Here's to hoping you get your monetization way before July.
There's your confetti, buddy.
Confettis.
That's celebrating. I don't have all that confetti stuff lined up here. But that's great news. Keep up the good work. And video processing software started with Shortcut, moved to DaVinci. I'm on a slower computer. What would you recommend?
Yeah, so I think DaVinci is probably your best bet. And unfortunately, DaVinci is a software that's actually very capable. And so it does take a little bit of computing power to be able to, do the kind of work that you want to do. And I'm assuming here that you're shooting in 1080p. In that case, you've got a good software, you've got a reasonable file size video file. I think the next step would be, unfortunately, looking at a computer that can, handle that. Video editing is a very, very computing intensive process, not only for the video card, but also for the RAM and for the CPU. So, it does take a nice computer to be able to tolerate that much processing power. And I will say if you're a Mac person, some of the Macs nowadays with the newer chip that they have, it'll outperform just about any PCs out there, at least within reasonable price ranges. So the Mac options are really, really good and can handle anything you can throw at it for video editing.
Awesome. I'm going to pull up here some soft boxes for lighting. I'm going to try to...
I think I see another question from Nelson Woodworks. If you don't mind, RT, I just wanted to quickly address that. So it says, I believe, with your high level of shooting, and you mentioned your 4K footage is large. Yep, they are. Are you storing all your files on an external hard drive? NAS. Yeah, so there are a couple of ways to really kind of deal with storage of media. And I think one of the most important things that you need to decide is how much content do you want to keep, and do you want to get rid of some because you may not need it ever again. And if you did, you may just have the exported version of your file and not the raw footage. I personally, right now, I'm just using regular hard drives and storing them in duplicates, which is kind of like using a NAS system. Like a NAS system is a network attached system. But I don't have a NAS set up yet because those can get very pricey, and it is quite the commitment. And at this point in time, I've decided that I really don't want to store all of my content, especially because I'm shooting in 4K. It's just not feasible to be able to keep all of that, and store them indefinitely. So it's something that you have to decide, and certainly a network attached storage system like that, which does require a little bit of technical know-how and does have some expense associated with it, they're fantastic options to be able to store and edit off of. For me, even though I store my like long-term storage, so to speak, files, they're on regular hard drives, I edit off of a solid state drive. So I have a portable external solid state drive. It can do about 500 megs per second, and that seems to be perfectly adequate to be able to handle and edit 4K files on the fly.
Awesome. So these soft boxes are kind of a I think people see them as a one size fits all, right?
Yeah.
And they obviously aren't, but they can serve a great purpose. And you can generally find an affordable set if it's important to you. What are the keys when setting up these soft boxes, and that you're not just putting spotlights on things?
Yeah, so I mean, the best thing is to use a softbox, because that's exactly what they do. What they do is they soften the light and they scatter it instead of being a kind of a more unidirectional light. And so you may notice that the shadows are not as harsh. There's like a little subtle, soft fall off to the shadows. And so softboxes, if you're using them, the bigger you can get in your shop, the better. And they will kind of make the light in a way where you don't have to try too hard, so to speak, because it's going to look pretty no matter what. If you have straight LED, panels that are just like looking at you with 1,000 eyes, those are going to be a little bit more harsher light. And so if you can find a way to use softboxes, or you can bounce light off of a bigger white wall or something like that, that's fantastic. In terms of positioning light, I would say, again, we are not a Hollywood production, right? We're trying to make sure that the things that we're building, we can see well ourselves, and it shows well in camera. So again, use a pragmatic approach. Scatter the light that you have in the shop and kind of flood it if you can. There's another type of softboxes out there that are primarily designed for your large lighting heads, not the LED panels. They're kind of like a tubular head, and they accept these specific mounts for lighting modifiers. And so those are called lanterns. Basically, it looks like one of those Chinese lantern made out of paper and maybe bamboo rim on the inside. It looks a lot like that, but what they do is they kind of do a 360-degree scattering of light. Now, it means you need a more powerful light to be able to scatter it that far out everywhere, but it applies a really nice, soft, beautiful light that goes everywhere. So I use those in my shop. On the ceiling, I have those lanterns with some big lights in there. And then on top of that, I use a softbox like the one you see in the image here, and I kind of carry that closer to me to kind of give a better viewing angle and more light in the space that I need to show on camera.
Awesome. Okay. There's more than, we've talked about different sources of light. And
Yeah.
if you like me, on most of my videos, it has been natural light. I pull my tools out into the driveway and I set up. That ends up with some hard shadows.
Yeah.
So we've talked about some alternatives, but if you don't have these things, there is lighting options around your house, right? I mean,
Yep. Absolutely.
You can move lamps around to
Absolutely.
provide a little bit more light.
Yeah, don't quote me on it, but just from looking at it, the Philips Hue light bulbs that you can find at Home Depot or Lowe's, they're a little bit more expensive. And the more I looked at it, the more I appreciated those lights, because they're actually very high quality lights. So the color rendering index, if you recall from what we mentioned earlier, I believe, don't quote me on it, I believe they're in the 97 range. And so you can use a lamp, which is designed to soften light, and use one of those light bulbs or a similar light bulb with a higher color rendering index that you can find off of Amazon, for example, and use that. And in the example that you described, RT, on being outdoors and shooting outdoors, those are unavoidable situation. Big production Hollywood movies have ways to control the lighting in the environment that they have, but most of us are not going to have that kind of a setup. So what you can do is look for overcast days. Those are going to give you the most beautiful light that you can shoot in an outdoor environment.
Awesome. Now there's last question of the night. So this goes back to the question before. So in the same matter, is it better just to keep your finished video rather than the RWA material?
Yeah, I mean, that's something that you would have to decide for yourself in terms of the storage solutions that you have and how deep you want to go into the rabbit hole of storing large files. For me, I delete a good chunk of my raw content because, I think we get personally attached to the things that are near and dear to our hearts, and the things that we produce are, we spend so much time and think so much about them that it's hard to let that go. But generally speaking, if you don't find yourself revisiting old content, it's probably time to let those content go and keep the exported raw file.
Yep, that's great. What in your closing remarks, and where can people find you, Suman?
Oh, sure. Yeah, so I have a YouTube channel. It is Woodcraft by Suman, and I also have an Instagram page. Again, goes by Woodcraft by Suman. If you have any questions, I apologize. I didn't get a chance to catch all of the questions that came through, the live stream. But if you have any questions and you want to know anything further, please feel free to reach out. I am an open book, and I happily welcome questions and comments of any of that nature.
We really appreciate you being here. Next week, we have Mastering Mayhem on our show, and we've got some great guests coming up. I'm going to have Friday Workshop on here, Easy Swan, and I'm working on some other great guests.
That's awesome.
Just got to get some dates lined up. So I really appreciate everybody being here tonight. As we leave the live stream, we will play the Shepherd's Workbench trailer again. Please take a look, consider subscribing to them, and give us some comments about what they did on their trailer. And I hear my wife calling. I got to go.
Hey everybody, my name is Joe, and this is Shepherd's Workbench. I'm a full-time youth pastor, and I own my own business doing custom projects. I love making videos, from woodwork to leathercraft, shop upgrades, tools, and even some custom pieces. When I make videos, I try to make them fun and entertaining, because ultimately, you're in your shop because you find it fun too. Hopefully in my videos, you're inspired to make some of the same things that I do from the plans that I have available, or you learn some tips and tricks along the way. I try to put out videos every 2 weeks of the projects that I build as gifts or for customers. So join me as we build together in this passion for working with our hands on Shepherd's Workbench.